Battles in the courts are all over the place, including in the state of Oregon. In the second half of the show, we're going to talk about a major battle in Oregon taking place to defend the rights of individuals to be able to worship, to be able to go to church without a heavy-handed government's edict to the contrary. But first, we're going to talk to someone about a very disturbing article out of a Harvard journal. This professor produced something that is very disturbing, and it's something that we're concerned is something that's not just isolated as one professor and one university, but it's something that we could be seeing actually across the United States. And that's a hostility to parental rights, and it's a hostility specifically to homeschooling and anything that doesn't agree with the agenda of those who do not like those with a Christian, biblical, or Judeo worldview when it comes to the education of their children. To talk with us about that right now on the program, we have with us Rebecca Koscis. Rebecca Koscis, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Brad. I appreciate it.
Now, Rebecca, I really admire you and your work. You're the general manager for a wonderful homeschool organization, and you've done a lot of work to help parents who want an alternative for their kids to be able to homeschool, especially in the state of California. Of course, there's organizations like CHEA all across the United States and different states, parents trying to work together to be able to provide some kind of alternative for the outrageous materials that are being brought into public schools, and also parents who are just fed up with the whole system. And yet, as this is growing, and as I think we're going to continue to see it grow, we see articles like the one out of the Harvard Journal where the professor outrageously attacked homeschooling, not as a good thing, but as something that is danger and risky. Please tell me more.
Well, you know, Professor Bartholet and her colleagues, I believe, perceive homeschooling a threat because parents have the right to, we see, the right to raise and educate their children according to their value system. Professor Bartholet made it very clear that she was opposed to the Judeo-Christian worldview, and also that she was opposed to parents having the right to raise and educate their children. Her perspective is that anybody who would be teaching their children outside of the mainstream, what she considers mainstream, should be highly regulated, presumably banned in the sake of homeschooling, and that it should all be replaced by state. And that's really what concerned me, Brad. I know we see this as the war against homeschooling. So many articles came out effectively blasting Professor Bartholet's arguments or her proposals, and I don't really feel like I need to go there right now, but we do see that it's a war on homeschooling being waged in the media, and they would like to see it acted out legislatively. Our perspective, though, is that we see, where does God place children? Children, are they born into a state or are they born into a family?
Right, they're born into a family, and when we have government come in, that's going to be very, very dangerous for the raising up of our children. We've already seen it in public schools, government schools. It's not even, they're not controlled by the public, controlled by the government. And we see that the changing the attitudes, the morals or amorals that are being thrust in our children and their way of thinking. You know, I personally, Rebecca, see a spiritual genocide about to take place in our public schools and our government schools because of the radical new sex ed curriculum and the agenda they're pushing all the way down to the kindergarten level. It's going to be very, very dangerous and almost impossible, really, for a child to grow up in government schools across the country where they're being taught things that make it impossible for them to believe those things that they're taught and still be a Christian and still believe in the Bible. They're making it absolutely impossible for a child to continue in their faith if the child, after 12 years of indoctrination or 13 years, doesn't agree with what they've been indoctrinated in, which is very, very difficult for a child to pull through. And it's very concerning. Let me ask you something about this professor. And I'm glad there was some pushback against her, but the problem is she's still hired and still working at Harvard, not just as a substitute. She's over a department at Harvard. That is very, very telling that we see Harvard with that kind of anti-parent, government knows best, George Orwellian viewpoint It's very, very disturbing. And I think we see it in Yale, we see it in Princeton, we've seen it in other universities as well, that kind of an attitude that parents need to be shoved aside. The state should take over the children. What are some of the specific dangers, quote unquote, that she mentions? Do you mind sharing some of those?
Okay, well, she claims that children are not protected if they're at home, that the state school is the only place for children to be protected against child abuse. But when we look at this and we wonder what on earth happened to Gabriel Fernandez, 60 reports to authorities, including his teacher and principal, and the child was still murdered. And they don't even take into consideration the fact that there's so much abuse taking place in the public schools themselves. If you go to sexualabuseInschools.org, you see that not just our children not being protected from others by these mandated reporters, but the mandated reporters are committing the abuse themselves. She turns a blind eye to that. She also claims that homeschool students are not positively participating in our democratic society. Totally oblivious to the fact that there are so many homeschool students in Harvard today that have gone on to be clerks for Supreme Court justices. We even have a homeschool graduate, not a Harvard graduate, but a homeschool graduate working in the White House, Jenna Ellis. She's a legal analyst to the President of the United States. So, I mean, and then we have everybody from your mom and dad raising 2 or 3 kids and make sure that they get out and vote, or they're involved in community feeding programs or involved in their church. Professor Bartholet and her colleagues have no clue what is really happening in the homeschool community today. They are taking this narrative and twisting it to accomplish their agenda, which we know is anti-Christian and anti-parental rights, and trying to seek to shape public policy and also legislation. And I'll tell you what, Brad, this was chilling to me. If you look at page 78 of her report that was published in the Arizona Law Review, that's a peer-reviewed publication, page 78 she starts talking about private school reform. She says some private schools pose problems of the same nature as homeschooling. Religious and other groups with views and values far outside the mainstream operate private schools with little regulation, ensuring that children receive adequate education and exposure to alternative perspectives. Policymakers should impose greater restrictions on private schools.
That is so dangerous, because what she's really saying is I don't like the Christian worldview. And this is just another sign of how dangerous it is if we let this attitude, this radical worldview, dominate those in elected office, because that's where it's going to come from. It's not going to come from someone on the street suddenly closing down the private schools. It's going to come from people in office, in the state houses, in the governorships, Congress, the White House. It's going to come from them pushing this into existence as a new norm. It's also going to come from judges allowing it, and that depends on whether or not we have the right judges being appointed. And we know that because they're appointed by the President of the United States. Federal judges are appointed by who's in the White House and who's occupying the U.S. Senate. If we want to give our rights away, parents, if you want to give your rights away, then don't vote. It's that simple. If you want to protect your children, then vote, and vote responsibly, vote biblically, because the stakes are simply too high. Rebecca, we're running out of time. What do you think parents should do who have a concern about this? You've got great resources at your website. I think it's CHEA.org, correct?
CHEA of CA.org. Yes. And we do. We're here to help families who are fed up and done with the government schools, or perhaps even are just not ready to send their children back to an institutional school in light of COVID-19. So we have tremendous resources. We've been advocating for parents to teach their children at home for more than 35 years. So if you go to CHEA of CA.org, we have everything you need to know there. Of course, you can always email us at CHEAinfo at CHEA.org, or visit us on our Facebook page, and we can get you connected and give you everything you need to know to get started. Parents can do this. You can't listen to the educational elites who have probably hundreds of $1,000s of school debt telling you that you can't possibly teach your children at home if you have, if you don't have an advanced degree.
So Rebecca, I agree 100% with what you just said. And parents need to look at their options. Also, when it comes to college and universities, instead of maybe Yale, Harvard, Princeton, where they're getting garbage, there's other great schools, Liberty University, Patrick Henry College, Hillsdale, just to name a few. But be involved, make a difference. And also on our website, we have great resources to encourage churches to become homeschool co-ops and to partner with parents across the country. Now's the time to get involved.
Parents across the state are keeping their kids home from school today. They say the new sex ed program is too inappropriate, adding the curriculum sexualizes children as young as kindergarten age.
They were protesting new guidelines for sex education in public schools.
They're concerned that a new sex education curriculum goes too far and takes away their parental rights.
If it's in California, I know many other states are doing it as well. This is not far behind. It's going to be everywhere.
We at Pacific Justice Institute have been fighting this for quite some time, but never at the degree and the level that we're dealing with it right now.
That I didn't think was quite necessary for 10-year-old kids.
If parents knew what was happening, I think they'd be very, very alarmed.
The California Healthy Youth Act now requires that school districts cover topics like gender identity, gender expression, and abortion.
For fifth graders.
It's not age appropriate, it's not medically accurate, it goes way beyond the law.
If it feels good, do it.
This is for fifth grade as well. This is still in the framework. And this is for third grade. And only they, meaning 6-year-olds, know what they are.
It's in government, it's in our medical societies, it's activists promoting this.
And they all said this is inappropriate. Children cannot process this information. It's harmful.
Whatever they're doing is not working.
This isn't the way that I would want my own children taught about something as important as this in their life.
So the California Department of Education still believes these books are appropriate. And these are the people that are making decisions over our children's education.
This is one of these battles in life where you drop absolutely everything and you go to the hills, because this is the hill I die on.
You can't teach this in an unbiased way. It's a moral topic.
When we tell parents, they're livid, they're angry, because they want to protect their children.
We will stop at nothing to protect our kids.
Don't be afraid, don't be discouraged, don't be intimidated.
Parents have to be vigilant, they have to be insistent.
All you have to do is start educating yourself.
The districts and the staffers are very good at misleading parents.
Without question, there is a growing movement of parents across the country who are speaking out and objecting to what's taking place. It doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you've got children, you're going to care. Folks, if you'd like to support the work of the Pacific Justice Institute, especially now, we greatly, greatly appreciate it. We have over 47 cases in active litigation, plus all these other new cases that we're taking to court to defend religious freedom and challenging the tyranny that we see in states like Oregon, California, and other states where the governors are trying to trounce upon religious people and trounce upon institutions of faith and treat them differently than secular institutions. I would say, folks, we're in the greatest travesty, the greatest assault on religious freedom that any of us have probably ever experienced in our lifetimes. And we need to stand up to it. And that's what we're doing at Pacific Justice Institute. So if you'd like to support the work of Pacific Justice Institute, or you'd like to get a copy of our resources, you'd like to get our Legal Insider, where you're kept up to date on all these cases that are taking place on a real-time basis, just go to our website, pji.org. That's P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. That's pji.org. We also have a really fantastic checklist to help your churches reopen safely and legally, no matter what state you're in. safe and legally, California, New York, Florida, wherever, go to our website and download this free checklist that we provide without charge, very detailed to help your church act responsibly in terms of both safety and the law. Go to pji.org. Now, to talk with us about one of those travesties that we've been facing, we have with us on the line attorney Ray Hacke, who heads up the Pacific Justice Institute office there in Salem, Oregon. Ray, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here, Brad.
Ray, now you've got a number of important things going on in Oregon, but one in particular involves a governor that is clearly, without question, has been abusing her authority and her power under the laws in the state of Oregon. Give us a background of what we're dealing with this governor and how you took on this governor and the outrageous mistreatment in terms of liberty and freedom there in the state of Oregon.
Well, part of the issue is that the law prescribes certain time limits that the governor is supposed to abide by when exercising her emergency powers. It's supposed to be a very limited window in which she can exercise them. You know, she gets 14 days at the outset, and if she needs another 14 days, she can extend that time once. After that, she needs to go to the legislature and get approval for more time. Unfortunately, she did not do that. She just, from the very outset of the case, said, you know, this state of emergency is going to be in effect for 60 days. When that period started to wind down, she extended it for another 60 days. And in between, she issued executive orders that infringe on religious freedom and indefinitely. She said that they will be in effect until they are terminated. Basically, in other words, you know, you get them back when she decides to give them back. So basically, she's just completely ignored the Constitution and statutes of the state of Oregon at every step in this process, and used the compelling interest in preserving public health and safety to justify her actions.
Yeah, this is outrageous. This is tyranny. So her mindset is, I don't care about the law. I don't care about the state constitution and limitations. I'm going to exert my control and power over the lives of Oregonians and decide whether or not businesses can open, churches can open, when I feel like it, whenever that might be. Who knows? 10 years? 100 years? She feels like she has this ability, apparently, to engage in tyranny as she sees fit. And of course, that really gets us upset at Pacific Justice Institute when we're going to bat for the ability for freedom and liberty, particularly for religious freedom there in the state of Oregon. Now, Ray, you didn't take this just, casually, like, oh, well, we'll just see what happens. You, on behalf of Pacific Justice Institute and a number of churches, have actually gone to battle in this. And tell us about what happened in the first stage of the court process.
Well, I've represented roughly 14 churches, 2 other religious entities, and at least 40 individuals from all across the state in a suit I filed against Governor Brown in Eastern Oregon. This was in early May. Right after I filed suit, I asked the court for a preliminary injunction. Basically, that's a court order prohibiting the opposing party from taking certain actions until the case is decided. I asked the court to invalidate Governor Brown's executive orders relating to the coronavirus on 2 grounds. First, she didn't follow procedures outlined in the state constitution and statutes that limit her emergency powers. And second, she was continually infringing on Oregonians' freedoms of religion and assembly on a daily basis. And the state and federal constitutions both explicitly protect those freedoms.
So that judge that you appeared before, that ruling made her executive order null and void and liberated everyone in the state of Oregon, right? I mean, churches, businesses. What happened next?
Well, I managed to open up the state for about 9 hours because within hours after the judge handed down the injunction, the governor fast-tracked the case to the Oregon Supreme Court. And they asked the Supreme Court for an emergency stay, which is an order that put the lower court's ruling on hold for a time. So basically, about 9 hours after the injunction was issued, the state got closed up again by the issuance of that stay.
Okay. So how did the judge respond to that moving forward? What happened?
Eventually, the Supreme Court kicked it back down to the lower court, and they gave the judge in the lower court two options. He could A, vacate the injunction, or B, he could show cause, which is legalese for you'd better have a good explanation as to why he wouldn't. The judge actually chose secret option number 3, which is he issued a 3-sentence response to the Supreme Court saying, "I stand by my ruling," and he didn't really explain why. And to be honest, I think that if the court looked at the injunction itself, that speaks for itself. He didn't really need to explain much more than that.
Yeah. Does the injunction, is it just a 1 line or 2 lines, or does he explain himself in that injunction? Because many people aren't aware of what's involved when a judge issues an injunction.
The injunction itself is about 5 pages long, which is actually pretty short by court standards. But it's basically he said that he pointed out that infringement on First Amendment protected freedoms for even minimal periods of time constitutes irreparable harm, and it was happening to Oregonians every single day. When churches can't meet on Sundays, when they can't host Bible studies, when they can't host youth group meetings, where people are, afraid to leave their homes and attend church because they're afraid that they'll be arrested, when states are handing down, or restricting the number of people who can attend, even if the church can accommodate significantly more, then there's a problem. I mean, and that's actually part of the issue here, is that Governor Brown's orders are backed up with the threat of criminal prosecution. Somebody could face either 30 days in jail or a fine of over $1,000 just for attending church, for leaving home for a quote unquote non-essential reason. And that's and basically, on top of that, Governor Brown has made clear that that these restrictions are going to go on until there's immunity to the coronavirus, until a vaccine is found, and that could take years, and it could never happen conceivably. So, and unfortunately, infringements on religious liberty, they have to be limited in scope and duration if they're going to happen at all, and hers are clearly not.
Right. Hers are indefinite, and as far as the scope, it's very wide. Major infringement upon individual liberties and rights, and the rights of people to congregate and go to church and have worship services. It's a criminal action if people violate that, if they go to church. It's a crime to go to church. I want people to understand that. This virus has gone way, way down. There's places in Oregon that don't even have a risk anymore. And this draconian order by this governor has no respect for freedom and liberty in that regards. We at Pacific Justice Institute, as you know, Ray, we're defending a church in the intolerant San Francisco Bay Area where the pastor is being criminally prosecuted. Small little church. They wore masks. They kept distancing. So that's the kind of tyranny that we've been having to face at Pacific Justice Institute. I understand that you went ahead and drafted a brief to respond to this. Real quickly, what did you argue in that brief, Ray, with the state Supreme Court?
Well, I argued that that there are time limits in place, that basically it was the intent of both the legislature, which enacted a very recent statutory scheme for dealing with public health emergencies, specifically like the pandemic that's facing the state of Oregon now, as well as a constitutional provision, both of which says that the governor is only allowed to wield, her broad emergency powers for a very limited window of time. And, basically, if she needs more time, she can get it, but she's got to get the approval of 3/5 of each house of the legislature. And so the legislature can weigh in, yeah, she needs more time, or say, no, you don't, you got to wrap this up. And so,
right.
So basically she's just gone around them. She's relied on a certain statute that she feels, lets her wield her powers broadly for however long she sees fit.
Well, Ray, I just want to thank you so much for the hard work you've done. I understand, the state Supreme Court is definitely stacked with Supreme Court justices actually that were appointed by this governor. So, when we look at these kinds of situations, it's not always about the law. Sometimes it's about ideology. Sometimes politics get in. Folks, I want you to pray for this state Supreme Court. Pray for Ray Hacke as we move forward. Make no mistake, we at Pacific Justice will not be silent when it comes to freedoms and liberties being trampled upon by those in public office. Ray, thank you again, and keep up the great work. So folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.